Well, hi there. I am here today with a whole bunch of really rad stuff that was sent to us by Josh's frogs so that we can create an amazing paludarium for a secret mystery species that they're sending to us. And we will show you here in a little bit exactly what that secret mystery species is. But it's amazing and I'm really excited about them. But first, I want to show you how we're going to build this paludarium for them. So Josh's Frogs has kindly sent us this Exoterra extra tall 12 by 12 by 24 paludarium enclosure. You can see it's got a lot of space down here for water, so it's got an aquatic region, and then also a lot of space for arboreal climbing species. And then they've also sent us their vivarium waterfall kit, which includes, well, most of this other stuff that we are going to need to turn this tank into a glorious waterfall. And just before I get too far, all of this stuff is available from Josh's Frogs, and down in the description to this video, there is a special discount code, so you can save a bunch of money when you go to Josh's Frogs, which is amazing because Josh's Frogs sells all kinds of rad stuff. You're going to be thrilled. So before I get started, I'm just going to walk you through the big picture of what we're going to be doing here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take these little cups for our plants, as well as this amazing rock decor, which I think is from Universal Rocks. And so they're fake. They're not real rocks, but they look like real rocks. So we're going to take the rocks, the fake rocks, these pots, this tube, which actually runs from the pump, also the cord to the pump, and these big pieces of cork, and we are going to put them in place in the back of the enclosure using this expanding foam. After we let the expanding foam cure, we're going to carve away at the expanding foam. We're going to cover it in silicone, and this is aquarium safe silicone. Very important that. So we're going to use this silicone to totally cover all of our carved away expanding foam, and then we're going to put this peat moss all over that and let that cure in place. Then once that's done, we can plant our plants in the pots. We can put our water in the tank with our riverbed sand, and we're going to use dechlorinator water conditioner. We've also got this cool stuff, which is called Purigen, which I haven't used before, but it's really cool because it'll take the tannins out of the water. It's rechargeable, stinking rad. Anyway, we're going to get this whole thing up and running, and we're going to check out that waterfall. So, all right, let's get to it. Exoterras always come with this foam backdrop, which, I mean, it's nice that they do. I'm not going to use it in this build, but I am going to save it because foam like that's actually fairly expensive, and there are a lot of cool things that you can do with pieces of foam of this nature. So we've done another video or two in the past where we've done a new backdrop for an enclosure. And with all of those, I did the same thing where I put the enclosure on its back, which is actually really helpful because then gravity is your friend. But what's going to be different this time is in all of my previous builds, and if you haven't seen those videos, we'll have them down in the description and probably right there. But in the past, we've always used Gorilla Glue for these builds. And this time, we're going to be using Great Stuff expanding foam. I will tell you that Great Stuff expanding foam and Gorilla Glue are basically the same thing. This is just an aerosolized version of Gorilla Glue, essentially. And so they do work very, very similarly. One thing I can tell you from that paludarium build is that I found that under stress, it's not quite as strong as Gorilla Glue. And so, you know, where my waterfall in that tank kind of protrudes out, I ended up with actually quite a bit of weight pulling on it, and the expanding foam separated from the back. And so I had to use silicone to hold it in place. However, with this one, we're just going to do the waterfall coming right down the back. And so we shouldn't have that issue of leverage. This should be strong enough to hold itself to the back of the enclosure. All right, so first things first, we're just going to play with all the pieces and figure out exactly where we want them to be when everything is said and done. So First thing, I'm going to need to get this pump in a place. I've learned from past waterfall builds that you want to make sure that your pump is in a place where you can access it fairly easily. Otherwise, whenever you have problems with your pump, and you will have problems with your pump at some point, you can be in a lot of trouble. I'm trying to get it out of there. So I'm going to try to put the pump somewhere where it's not too conspicuous, but where I can get to it if I need to. Comes with multiple possible attachments. So I'm going to make sure I have the right one for my tube, which I assume will be this big guy. Yep. I find that the tube is still just a little bit loose, and so I'm going to try to use this zip tie to secure it down so it's just a little bit tighter. That actually seemed to help quite a bit, and I'll use my handy dandy scale tool to really ratchet it down. Giddy up. Alright, so I'll start to get that in place. I need to make sure that the cord can come out. Another thing I'm going to take care of when I have the expanding foam out is there was a design flaw with these Exoterra tanks that I discovered with my neon day geckos, and I'm just grateful those didn't get lost as a result of this. But small animals can creep up into this hole, and then when these little sliders are slid over in order to prevent things from getting out through the little holes for cables, animals can climb up into that gap, through there, and out. And so I learned that the only way to prevent them from escaping was to fill this up with expanding foam, and so I'll be doing that on this build. The things that are going in here are mystery surprise animals. They're not very big, and I am concerned they might be able to sneak out. Not as easily as the neon day geckos, but better safe than sorry. So I'm going to run this cable up right here in the corner, and as straight as I can for the most part. This will be completely concealed by expanding foam, so if it's not perfectly flush, and then just pop it into place there in one of the places for cords to escape. Again, that's built into the lid. And as a result, my tube's going to run up here. I'm going to have it hook over to the side so it doesn't accidentally have too much power and spray out of the top. And I'm putting the pump all the way against the back. That way it can be fairly concealed. And I'm not going to build my backdrop all the way to the bottom. I'm just going to build it pretty much to the water level. So it shouldn't be a problem. I should have an easy time getting to it just through the water. What I'm really going to have to fiddle with is going to be my rocks and my cork bark, because this is actually going to be about all of the land area that I'm going to have available. So let's see, I got this big guy here. Ooh, that would be interesting. This is a pretty cool hollow piece of cork bark. I could consider running this tube right up through it as a possibility. That's pretty cool. It's not necessary because I can just bury that tube in the actual background as well, but I'm going to look into it. This one's not so hollow. This is an awful lot of cork for this little tank. I may not end up using all of it, but we'll see. Just run this up the back thusly. I informed you thusly. Some pretty cool moss on this one. Okay, and I'm going to position this little piece here underneath the tube for the waterfall so that the waterfall comes out a little bit instead of right into the backdrop. Again, I'm just playing right now, and what I've found is I don't really have anywhere for my plants to go. So I might see what my other options are. Maybe. Again, I might not end up using both of these because I just don't have the space. This is their waterfall kit, I think, potentially even for larger enclosures than this one. So let's see if I just pull this out for a minute, what it might look like over some. Maybe flip it over. Yeah, this is definitely a kit designed for a bigger tank than this guy, and that's fine. It just means we've got options. So that pretty much precludes any plants from being there. So after much fiddling about, I think I've figured out what we want to do. We're using 4 of our 5 rocks, we're using 1 of our 2 branches, and we're using 1 of our 3 pots. Because this waterfall kit is actually adequate to use in a much larger enclosure than this one. And since we don't have a giant amount of space here, we're just gonna make do with the space we have and save the other stuff for a future project. So, it's expanding foam time. One thing I can tell you, unless you get the resealable kind of expanding foam, you're gonna wanna use all of your expanding foam at the same time. It doesn't tend to save very well. So, figure out exactly what you wanna do. I'm gonna tuck my tie and get some gloves. All right, let's do this. Remember to tuck your tie. Okay, you don't wanna get any of this on your tie or that tie's done for. All right, I'm gonna lift my rocks, and then I'm gonna put down a little expanding foam, and I'm gonna set them back in the rocks. So, here we go. All right, so here we are. It's the next day, and our expanding foam has completely cured. And so now we're gonna start the next step, which is gonna be carving this. I should mention that I did not forget to put some expanding foam right here in that little gap in the lid that I was talking about earlier. And so the first thing I'm actually gonna carve is I'm just gonna level that off. I'm gonna cut off the extra foam so this lid will still fit on the enclosure. Okay. Now we'll play with the foam. Okay. So right now, all I'm doing is I'm just cutting away at the foam. I'm kind of exposing some of the porous inner portion, which is a little more rock-like. It'll also make it easier for silicone to cling to it. And I'm just kind of cutting it down to a shape I want. I'm getting rid of places where maybe I don't like the way that it bubbled up or things that it covered up. I'm gonna cleave out the rocks a little bit so I can see them better. And just kind of get a shape that I'm happy with for my backdrop. This doesn't need to be perfect because it is going to be covered with silicone and then the peat moss. So in the end, it's going to end up covered with a lot of stuff. Michelle was surprised how many things I actually do with this Skeletool, but I use it all the time. We'll have a link to this down in the description because you totally want one. Okay, so I've now completed a pretty decent cut of the expanding foam, which is going to be important because this new surface is much more porous. I'll be able to get my silicone to grip onto that really nicely, and also it allows you to cut it down to kind of the shape you want. I tried to free up a lot of space here where the water's going to be coming out because I want it to flow onto this rock and down onto these rocks. But some of it, just sort of like nature, you just see what you get. So I blew out one of my gloves, I replaced that, and this is actually where I really need the gloves because it's silicone time. Lock and load. I'm gonna get my bag of substrate ready to go because we might just sort of do this piecemeal. So this is peat moss, younger brother to Randy, former NFL wide receiver. All right. There we go. So this might require a lot of gloves because we're going to be squeezing it on here, but then we're going to be spreading it around with our fingers. Okay, make sure your tie is tucked. You never want to do this with a tie flying free in the breeze. What the air? Woo! Once you can smell it, you have 11 minutes to live. Man, that just hit me real hard. Like one big kick in the nose. All right. We're getting pretty close now. A little hole there, a little bit there, right there. All right, let's put Pete on in. Let's get that on there. And now we wait. About 24 hours, so. All right, it's been a few days. We've let the silicone cure completely so that there's no smell of silicone at all anymore in this tank, which is especially important given the nature of our surprise guests that will be living in it. So now it's time for our moment of truth. All right, we're gonna stand this tank up and clear all the substrate off that we can and hope that we covered everything. All right. For the most part, this is looking pretty good. I can see a few little holes. You've got a couple options if you spot these little holes. One of them is you can silicone them and basically reapply and just fix all your mistakes. The other thing is you can't just leave them and stuff will grow over it in time. It'll probably still look pretty good. The only holes I'm seeing for the most part seem to be where our water is going to be cascading down. And I have a feeling it's not going to be a big deal. But it just kind of depends on you and how much that's going to bother you. Since this has a water feature in it, after I clear as much substrate out as I can, I am going to go ahead and spray down everything and try to knock as much off as I can and get that out of here before I try to fill it up with water and have the waterfall knock it all in. I have a feeling I'm going to end up with a bit of a mess once that water feature starts going no matter what I do, but I'm going to do my best to get as much of the substrate off as I can. Okay. Good enough, because I'm about to make a mess anyway. All right. I'm going to spray especially where the water is going to be cascading down from the water feature. And then I'm just going to kind of fill this up with water, and I'm going to siphon it out with an aquarium siphon. So that's the plan. I am going to get the rest of it as well, but I don't need to get it quite as well as the waterfall. I got a little bit of unruly silicone that got into places that I didn't really want it, just a thin layer over here. And you can get that off with a razor blade. So this is a little holder for a razor blade. And I'm just gonna try to work those off. All right, now I'm gonna use my siphon and my dirty water bucket to get as much of that junk out of there as I can. And now that we've had buckets of fun, we'll go ahead and just use a paper towel to mop up the rest of the dirt. At this point, I'm going to fill it up one more time just to test the water feature to make sure that that's all working right. I think I've got about as much substrate out as I want, but I want to make sure the waterfall works before I go on past this point. Now for the moment of truth. It works! So perfect. I think we've got flow figured out. We got most of the substrate cleaned out. I'm going to go ahead and siphon out this water. And then I think we'll be ready to add some plants. At this point too, I've still got the option of using this stick. I think I like it in there. I like it hiding that pot that's back there. I'm going to throw in a few plants. See how this looks. I've decided that I am going to include this stick. It's going to give our inhabitants a little more surface area, plus food for the inhabitants, surface area on which to climb and get out of the water. And I'm going to try it over here actually to see if it'll do some fun things with our water feature, because the water may actually cascade over this as well. We got our plants in there. I think it's time to add a little bit of river bottom sand to the bottom of it. And then we're going to add our water and our water conditioner. Then it'll be pretty much ready to go. So I have with me a bunch of purified drinking water that I got from the grocery store. You can potentially use tap water because we're going to be using water conditioner from Josh's Frogs either way. And so we don't have to use this sort of water. We could use tap water. Around here, the tap water is very, very hard. So we end up with hard water stains. I try not to use anything but purified water and distilled water. You don't want to use only distilled water, but if you've mostly been using water that has other minerals in it, then you can include a lot of distilled water in filling your water back up. This is the way I'm going to go again. You can use tap water if you don't have a hard water problem. I'm just going to add 2 gallons at first and then test my water feature one more time. All right, so you might notice I've torn this enclosure back down. We got almost to the point that it was done, and this is my first time ever doing silicone with substrate on top of expanding foam. I normally do the Gorilla Glue background that we've shown in some of our past enclosure builds, but I really do want to give this, my best effort, and it didn't turn out very well. I wasn't happy with it at all. For one thing, the substrate really didn't stick to the silicone. I think there might be a couple of problems here. I might have put the silicone on in too thin of a layer, and I don't think I pressed the substrate into the silicone enough. Another thing that I didn't like was that I was only using the peat moss, and normally I use a sand and peat moss, well, not even peat moss, I usually use Eco Earth, and I use some sphagnum moss, and I mix that all together, and that seems to stick really well. And so I've done that. I've taken the peat moss from before. I've actually added some of the river sand, which you've noticed I've pulled back out of here. And not only have I pulled it out so that I can redo the background, I pulled it out because I didn't like using the river sand as a substrate. It was really clouding the water, and for the animals that are going to go in here, I just don't think it's what I'm going to want to use. But I did use the river sand for my backdrop, and then I'm going to go with pebbles in the bottom of the enclosure. The reason that I think we were having a real problem with the sand clouding the water is because our pump is right on the bottom of the tank. And so it was pulling a lot of the sand up, and also our water's not that deep. You can use sand. Sand can make a great substrate in a lot of enclosures. It just needs to be quite a bit deeper and or not have the pump pulling right from the bottom where it's sucking the sand up and spitting it back out. So anyway, I'm going to make a few changes. We're going to use a different substrate in the bottom. But first, I'm going to redo the backdrop. I'm not going to worry about the area that's covered with the waterfall. And I'm glad we did get to see how that waterfall is going to work. And I'm pretty happy with it. But I am going to redo the substrate over here, especially so that our plants can grow up and onto the substrate in the back. I think that's going to look really cool. Anyway, this is my first try. We always learn a lot our first time trying something new, and I am really excited about how this is going to look when it's all done, but let's do it right. All right, now I'm going to put the substrate on top, our new mix, and I'm going to push it down. I'm going to really make sure it gets into the silicone so it doesn't fall off like before. All right, I think we're done here. We're gonna leave this until the silicone, until you can't smell it at all. That way we'll know there aren't gonna be any chemical problems. It's totally dry and set. Then we'll finish it up and put our mystery inhabitants in here. All right, it's been a few days. We've let the silicone cure completely. And I gotta tell you, I'm so glad that we redid this. This has been a learning process for me. And so I didn't know exactly what I needed to do to get this background to really stick on here. We used the different mixture. It looks awesome. So I've got some extra substrate that I've cleaned off here. I'm gonna clean out the bottom of this, and then we'll have the moment of truth. I got it cleaned out pretty well. More substrate's gonna fall down, but I'm ready to show you how things look using our different substrate, which includes, well, just a lot of the things that were included with the kit, but we included the sand and the peat moss and some sphagnum moss that I added myself. It really, I think, has, well, I mean, it's stuck to the silicone. I would definitely recommend using a mixture sort of like this instead of just the peat moss, at least for us. That didn't work at all. It didn't stick at all. But da-da-da! Our backdrop. I really like it. I'm really excited about it. All right, now let's get those plants in there. All right. So I'm gonna add some gravel to the bottom. I have rinsed this gravel carefully. Depending on where you get your gravel, it can make a huge mess. And the huge mess and clouding the water and messing with the pump is actually why we decided not to use the sand as our substrate at the bottom. I'm using gravel instead today. Rinse it well. Okay, rinse it really well. Let's see here, I'll add a little. So this Josh's Frogs kit included 3 of these little plant holders for you to put into your backdrop. The thing about this waterfall kit is this waterfall kit is it can be used in any size tank. This is kind of a narrow tank, and so we didn't have space to use all 3 of them. If we had a much bigger tank, then I would have used all 3 for sure. So I've only got one place to plant a plant up high, but I've picked my plants carefully. So the one that I'm gonna put up high is a ficus, and you might recognize this from our video on 5 of the best plants for bioactive enclosures. The other one I've got is a pothos, and I'm actually gonna rinse all the dirt, all the soil out of it, and I'm gonna put it down here in the bottom in the water because pothos can do that, and it'll have roots all down in here, which will actually help with our nitrogen cycle. It's gonna be stinking rad. It's always good practice to rinse your plants before you put them in here, especially if you're putting amphibians in here. And I will tell you that our mystery species going in this new enclosure is an amphibian. So we've been particularly careful with these plants to rinse them well so there aren't any pesticides on them. It wasn't good order of operations for me to put my substrate in there before the plant. So I'm gonna use this so that I can catch any substrate that falls. It's looking pretty cool. Let's get some water in here. I'm gonna be using purified and distilled water, but along with that, I'm still gonna use the Josh's Frogs dechlorinator that came with the kit because I'm not positive there's no chlorine in here, and just to treat it generally. It's especially necessary if you use tap water because again, we're putting amphibians in here and we want them to live. So it looks like about 2 gallons was enough at least to submerge our pump. We might add more if we like the way that it looks kind of up to this black line a little bit better. But for now, let's test it out. 3, 2, 1. All right, our tank it's working. I'm really happy actually with the way that it looks. I've used really all of the things that Josh's Frogs sent to us. This has been an amazing little kit. It's kind of a one-stop shop for almost everything you would need to build this tank, and definitely all you would need to do a waterfall in really any tank that you're gonna do. I'm really happy with it. I mean, really, I think a little bit of moss and these plants are the only things that I added to this. So this is fantastic. Now we're gonna install our UV light and our hood, and then it'll be time for our mystery amphibians. If you decide that you want to do this, you can get all of these supplies straight from Josh's Frogs, which is just a fantastic company. I strongly encourage you to go to them. And we have a discount code down in the description, so you might as well save a little money while you're there. What do you guys think? I think it's time for some inhabitants. All right, this is what's going in our new paludarium. Josh's Frogs sent us some animals I'm actually very excited about. I almost got them to go in that paludarium. These are starry night reed frogs, and they are absolutely spectacular. They sent us one adult male, one adult female, and 2 unsexed juveniles. We're actually hoping to produce them here. They're supposed to be fairly easy to breed. We'll see how we do. We might have little starry night reed frog tadpoles in here pretty soon, which would be really, really exciting. But for now, I'm gonna transition them in here. By the way, we will have a video on these guys coming out very, very soon, so stay tuned for that. If you don't already subscribe, click the little bell so you don't miss our video on starry night reed frogs to figure out if that is the best pet frog for you. I'm pretty excited about this paludarium. Thank you, Josh's Frogs, for making this possible. Don't forget to check them out down in our description. As always, like and subscribe. We hope to see you real soon. Let me see how many shakes. Minimum 60 seconds. Are you ready? Go. So how about that local sports team?
Oh, don't my favorite sports team, go.
You ever tried to put socks on that you've been wearing? They just don't go on like dry socks.
Are your feet exceptionally wet?
Sometimes. Back to school. To prove to Jason that I am not a fool.
Good luck.
Shouldn't be allowed. I should have been kicked out of society a long time ago. Ready?
And action!
Oh my gosh. Glorious.